I just wanted to make one point that just highlight research that we've done about a year and a half ago on the costs of refugee resettlement in the United States compared to refugee protection in the countries that people are taking shelter in, you know, like for instance in Turkey or Jordan where Syrians go. And our research suggests that the 5-year cost of resettling someone here is actually 12 times greater than the UN's estimate of the cost of taking care of people in the country of first asylum. So that it's, I mean, it's even apart from the burden on state and local taxpayers, it's remarkably inefficient. And I've submitted it's actually immoral to resettle refugees when essentially we're, to use your lifeboat analogy, if there's 12 people who need a lifeboat, we're sending one yacht that holds one person instead of 12 life preservers to, you know, take care of all 12 of them. So just to put it all in context, even the idea of resettling refugees on a large scale, I would submit is problematic. So let's open it up to questions. I actually had just a quick point that I wanted, I guess maybe Don to talk about is, what are the grounds for refugees? Just sort of very, not in detail, but sort of what's a refugee, what are the grounds, and how is it different from political asylum specifically?
Basically, a refugee is a person who was outside of his or her home country and is fearing return because of persecution based on race, nationality, religion, political opinion, or particular social group. An asylum seeker is a person who's gotten here on his or her own, either overstayed a visa or across the border, and claims asylum also on the basis of fear of persecution back home on those 5 grounds. Congress, the judiciary, and the executive branch have managed to place anybody that they want into any of those categories if they have to. For instance, you're fleeing China's one-child policy, which no longer exists. You're a political in category considered. You're a single mother from Guatemala. You're considered a particular social group. Particular social group is a very broad categories you could imagine they could put anything into.
Kind of like a catch-all sort of,
Right.
anybody can be classified as a particular social
Just about.
group. Yeah, sort of right-handed people, you know, who have a face for radio,
Just
like
about.
myself. I would be this particular social group. So any questions or comments from anybody? Yeah, if you could identify yourself too, please.
Sure, Mark. I'm Paul Bedard with Washington Examiner. For Don, you said 45,000 under Trump, but you think that'll be substantially lower.
Yes.
What number do you peg it to be and why?
Well, first of all, any of those quotas are just targets or ceilings. They're not targets. They're ceilings. They could come in at half that, and I personally think it'll probably come in at half that. I think it'll come in 25,000 or so.
Because it's running lower now.
Based
in other
on,
words.
yeah, based on the traffic. I mean, it could ramp up. It's not going to come anywhere near 45,000. Let's say 30,000. Well, what's done was the president used his prerogative to set a lower quota. And that's part of the problem with the system is the next president can come in and say, I want 1 million to come in. There's generally, while there is language around congressional consultation, historically, and I've heard this directly quoted, Congress doesn't do anything. They basically take what the president tells them. I think in the last few years, with the Syrian immigration, there's a lot more attention, and I don't think they will avoid their responsibility as much in the future. But in the past, they have. Basically, the president, the executive branch sets the number, and that's it. They set the number, and they set the global regions. We're taking so many from Africa, so many from Asia, so many from Europe. With some input, definitely some input from Congress as to how we're going to define who is a refugee, but not as much pushback on the actual numbers. So it's simply because Trump said we're gonna cut the refugee quota down to 45,000. That's the only reason why the numbers are lower.
I had a question for Richard. If you could just elaborate a little more on what's the next step now. So at the district court level, the judge decided Tennessee didn't have standing.
Right.
So now who decides whether you're going to appeal and sort of what are the next steps?
Right. Now, our client is the General Assembly of the state of Tennessee. they appointed 4 individuals to represent their interests with the Thomas More Law Center, because we can't deal with over 100 people every time we need to make a decision. So the first thing we have to do is consult with the 4 representatives of the council, of the General Assembly, give them our view, and I can tell you our view right now is just by a scan of the opinion. There are a lot of, it's filled with a lot of appealable issues. So our view is that we should appeal it. Now, there's different ways we can go about it. One is to ask for a rehearing. Now, what was interesting, we asked for oral argument in this case, and it was a very important case. The judge didn't grant oral argument, so the judge basically made this a very important decision on the briefs rather than having the lawyers attempt to clear up any kind of confusion he may have had on either side. So the first thing is we're going to decide if our clients say go ahead. And of course, we're not charging them. So the state of Tennessee isn't out any money because we filed this lawsuit. They can say, yeah, we want to go forward with it, and we would relish that because we think that the judge is wrong. That's why we have appellate courts. That's why we have the Court of Appeals. We'd go to the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. Let's say there's a 3-judge panel there, they rule against us. We'll ask for an en banc hearing, which brings in more of the judges to make a decision, or we go directly to the Supreme Court of the United States. I believe if our clients allow us to go forward, this case could very well end up in the Supreme Court of the United States because we believe that this judge ignored their decision in the Sebelius case. And that was what we were relying upon.
Thank you, Richard. I had a question for Jeff. Are there other communities in Minnesota you guys have talked to? Because presumably there's other places that are primary refugee resettlement places in Minnesota. And at the state level, have you gotten any feedback? Is the governor's office or whatever, I mean, are they hostile to your concerns? Are they sympathetic? How is that working?
Well, I've been in contact with Wilmer, it's the other relocation city, and there's a lot of chaos there too as well. Also, some officials down in Rochester, that's the home of Mayo Clinic too as well. So I'm seeing issues there too as well. Unfortunately, at the governor's office, it's been more or less silent. The governor was in St. Cloud a year and a half ago, and he basically made a comment that if you don't like it, you can leave. And that was very hurtful to everybody, even some.
So he was saying that to the Americans, not the refugees.
He said everybody in the room, and there was actually Somalis in the room, and reports I got that even some of the Somalis kind of grimaced when they heard that. That was not helpful for a governor to say that. So sadly, that actually, I think, fed into the problem. It didn't help heal matters.
Good, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I want to thank all of
Hold this up, microphone just a second.
Hi, I want to first thank all of you for sharing this morning. And I mean, I really do hear a lot of fear and frustration, concern from each of you from your respective positions. Jeff, I just wanted to clarify because forgive me, I'm not familiar with the makeup of the City Council of St. Cloud. I think, just want to clarify 2 things you said. One, I think you said that 18 individuals arrived as refugees this federal
quarter.
fiscal year.
Fiscal year 2018, 18
Right.
into St. Cloud was the
Right.
report.
So, and I think we're almost halfway through the year because it starts in October.
That was
Right.
the first quarter, he said,
First quarter.
October through the end of last
Okay,
year.
okay, great. Thank you, thank you. But also, you made a pretty stunning statement. Could be a house cleaning, but I don't know what you mean because I don't know the makeup of your council. Can you just clarify?
House cleaning, I'm talking about the election this fall. As you know, the November election is not far off anymore. There's 7 council members, and there's the 4 ward council members are up for re-election, and I'm on and what I'm hearing, at least from my constituents, the frustration that we've been at you for 3 years, this resolution. I was the only one that brought this resolution, the only one that supported it, because there's so much fear going on. What I'm seeing from the constituents is kind of like, fine, we're going to start voting you out, and we're going to move right up into the legislature and our local area members. I think there's a lot of frustration toward them too as well. So I'm seeing it, I'm really seeing it in St. Cloud, but I think Wilmer, they're on the same track we are, and Rochester. I can't speak for some of the small rural areas in northern Minnesota, but, in terms of the budget, it affects the whole state.
Oh, yeah, did you have a question? Yeah.
I did. You said that 18 in the first quarter of this year?
18 refugees were resettled the first quarter of fiscal year 2018, which started October.
How do they decide who gets these refugees? Because I'm looking at the Pew Research Center for 2016, and they indicated that in 2016, when 84,995, I think it was, refugees were resettled, none went to Delaware and none went to Hawaii.
And
So-
none went to Wyoming.
Or 10 went to, yeah,
Right.
Wyoming and Arkansas and DC got a handful. But yeah, how is it that they decide who gets whom?
You know, that's a good question. I'm still trying to get an answer to that. At the last quarterly meeting, you know, I looked at the list, and the proposed, you know, the caseload here is the 5 countries: Burmese, Ethiopia, Iraq,
it's-
Kenya, and Somalia. And the report I got is we got some folks from Somalia, which is on the list, but also some folks from Afghanistan, which is not on the list.
Yeah, it's the feds and working with the voluntary agencies, working with the 9 main contractors. They work it out, they get together, and they literally, as they come in, they place them.
So do they place them where the contractors are? Or do
Yes, they place them where a contractor already is, and they look for high welfare states, states with generous Medicaid requirements, and so on.
And with
Absolutely.
relatively low rent, too. That's also
Right,
another
jobs,
issue.
and they do look for jobs too. They're in fact, jobs is really big. They really look for low wage jobs for these people to fill. Yes.
Yes, sir, in the back. Wait for the mic. If you could identify yourself, too, please.
This is Jim Simpson, Center for Security Policy. And all of those decisions are made when the voluntary agency fills out something called an abstract. And that abstract details all of the various attributes of the given place that they're targeting. And a big part of that, although clearly not the only part, but a big part of that is whether or not there's people actually living there from the same, area. So it has like family reunification issues as well.
Thank you. Up here.
Kasha Luna with the Center for Immigration Studies. This is for Mr. Thompson. Who is the defendant on the case?
The complainant on our case, it's the General Assembly, it's the 2 senators, legislators, John Stevens and Terry Lynn Weaver, and it's the state of Tennessee, which is being represented by the General Assembly.
And whom are you suing? In other words, who's the defendant?
We are suing the State Department, we're suing the Health and Human Services, we are suing the Director of ORR. We didn't sue the President, because I think he's on our side, at least politically he's on our side. And I remember hearing him during the campaign, we should do away with the Refugee Resettlement Program in the United States. We should have safe zones in the area where these refugees come from. They will be better taken care of, and I think you indicated, Mark, that it's a lot more cost-effective.
Right, yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, in the back. Hold on. Wait for the mic. If you could identify yourself too, please.
My name is Ashley. I am a journalism student at GW, and I actually worked with UNHCR in the past. My question is that, economics and political reasons aside, do you think it's important that the United States government and states take in refugees and provide resettlement for them?
I think there's definitely a place for refugee resettlement. It should be more or less on a case-by-case basis rather than on a group basis, and it cannot be in massive numbers. So I definitely am supporting refugee resettlement, meaning bringing some people in that literally have no place to go. A reporter who's reported on something that, has now got them in trouble with the government, things like that, but not necessarily group influx, especially where there are regional solutions that are available, which in the past we've bypassed that when it was just waiting to happen to bring people in. So I'm generally a supporter, but of a smaller program than we have now. Plus, we see it grows. We see that it has potential to grow. There's so many humanitarian immigration programs now, not just the refugee program.
And if I could add something too, the point of refugee resettlement should be a last resort for people who literally cannot stay where they are for a second longer. The UNHCR itself prepares a report about all the people that it refers for resettlement to here or to Australia or Europe. In other words, all the various refugees that it refers for resettlement, and it classifies them as to how urgent their cases are. And the emergency cases, which in my perspective is really the only people that should be considered for resettlement, the emergency cases, this was in 2016, accounted for 0.4%, 0.4% of all the people they referred for resettlement. Those are the people who should be resettled. Don has actually written on this issue of regional solutions. There's this really telling example of the Somali Bantus. These are people from Somalia whose ancestors were enslaved by the Arabs, they were captured by the Arabs slave traders further south in Africa, and then brought to Somalia. And their descendants are still considered, frankly, subhumans by the Somalis themselves. Somalia doesn't want them. A lot of them ended up outside Somalia as a result of all the chaos over the past couple decades. Somalia didn't want them back. They said, you know, your problem now, to Kenya or wherever they were. Interestingly enough, Mozambique and Tanzania, the countries where their ancestors were kidnapped from by the Arab slavers, were willing to take them back, but wanted resettlement assistance. They wanted some money so they could properly resettle these people. Instead, the State Department said, no, we'll just bring them all to the United States. It's an absurd idea. So the whole point of refugee resettlement should not be virtue signaling on the part of the United States, which unfortunately too much of it is, but rather last resort protection for people who have no other options. So let's wrap it up here. I appreciate everybody coming. I can't speak for the guests, but I think they'd probably be willing to be accosted afterwards. This video, we're broadcasting it live now, but also will be on our website for people to watch in the future. Again, cis.org is our web address, and hope to see you at our next event. Thank you.